like to think that among the ranks of Utah, Florida comes pretty darn close to doing things right. He stood up to tyranny. He stood up to his own form of the deep state that existed for a long time in Florida, taking steps to weed it out. I appreciate his efforts, and ever since I first met him back in 2011, I've appreciated his friendship and his commitment to the greatness of our country. And so I want to make two introductions right now. First, I'm going to introduce Governor DeSantis to Utah's secret weapon in protecting liberty and defeating tyranny. That's you. And I now introduce to you my friend, the governor of the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis.
Well, hello, Utah. I bring greetings from the free state of Florida. I want to thank Senator Lee for standing for our Constitution. Sometimes that's a very lonely task when you're in Washington, D.C. nowadays. I also want to thank the Governor Cox, Attorney General Reyes. I think we've got some members of our congressional delegation, the leaders of the state legislature. It was so good to visit with all of you. You know, when Utah was first settled in 1847, the Salt Lake Valley was a cold, barren desert. The settlers were seeking religious liberty. They had a vision, and they went to work. And probably people wouldn't have predicted, but if you fast forward to today, I can say, as an objective observer, by any metric, Utah is one of the best governed, best performing states in these United States. You have a sound economy. You promote a good business environment. You stress the importance of education. You have fiscal and budgetary stability, and you have safe communities. And I think underlying the success of Utah has been a commitment to freedom. Like Florida, Utah proves that freedom works. Now, over the last few years since I've been governor, people have looked to Florida for leadership in a variety of different ways. I was recently visiting with some folks in Iowa, and people said, you know, Iowa, they're really the Florida of the Midwest with all the conservative stuff they're doing. Well, let me just tell you, maybe it's the little secret, but it might just be that Florida is the Utah of the Southeast. I'm just saying. But you should feel fortunate to live here, just as I'm fortunate to live and work in the state of Florida, because throughout our country, we're engaged in a battle to preserve the cause of liberty. Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is one generation away from extinction, that it's not passed along in the bloodstream. It must be cultivated and fought for. And I must say, for most of my life, when I would hear that quote, I thought it was a good quote, but I thought it was a little bit much. I thought it was hyperbole. We are Americans. After all, isn't freedom in our DNA? Isn't this something that just runs as a matter of course? But I think if you've looked what's happened over the last few years, I don't think anybody could have lived through this experience where we saw churches forcibly shuttered in states that allowed liquor stores and strip clubs to operate, where we saw people's freedoms come under attack like never before. Freedom is fragile. Freedom can be squandered. And so we are proud of earning the moniker of the free state of Florida, but this is not something that was preordained. And we came very close to taking a much different path. When I got elected governor in 2018, it was by 32,000 votes over 8 million votes had been cast in that election. It was less than 0.5% for a victory margin. And in reality, that was not out of the ordinary for Florida elections. If you look the previous decade in president elections, governor elections, 2010 all the way to 2018, all those races, 1-point margins, one direction or the other. And so I'm coming into a situation where the state is viewed as evenly balanced politically, swing state, and I was told, listen, don't rock the boat. Keep your head down. You may not want to make waves going in there because you may upset this political balance that we have in the state of Florida, and if you make some wrong moves, you'll upset it in the favor of the Democrats, and then you'll tip the state to them. And I understood that, and honestly, it was not crazy advice, but I rejected that advice. My view was I may have earned half the vote, but that entitled me to wield 100% of the executive power, and I intended to use that authority to advance conservative policies and to help my state. We would do that by governing on the basis of conviction, not putting our finger in the wind and trying to get ahead of wherever public opinion may be blowing. I said going in, and to this day it's true, we have never taken a single poll about any issue about telling me what to do as governor. I don't think you govern by polls. A leader is not captive to what a poll may say. A leader gets ahead of public opinion. A leader sets out a vision, executes the vision, and delivers results. And guess what? When you do that, people follow you and they have your back. We also understood that you could have the best ideas in the world as an executive, you can make the best decisions in the world, you can have a great policy agenda, but if you don't have a cadre of people serving in your administration who share that agenda and are going to put the interests of the state and the community ahead of whatever personal agenda or personal interest they're bringing, then none of it's going to amount to very much, because those are the folks that have to carry out the vision. And so we told people, if you're bringing anything else to this job other than what's in the best interest of the people of Florida and to satisfy the promises we made to them, then pack your bags right now. You have no place in this administration. We're not doing drama. We're not doing palace intrigue. We are focused on executing our agenda day after day, week after month, year after year. And guess what? Because we've had that focus on the purpose of being there, we've been able to accomplish more than anybody's able to accomplish in Florida history. Part of the reason we did that is because I said I'm not going to be like some of these Republicans. They get into office and they're like potted plants. They don't do anything. They wait for all this stuff to happen. Some of them don't like making decisions, because as a leader, anytime you make a decision, there's going to be people that like it, and then there's going to be some people that don't. So one way not to alienate anyone is just not to do anything. But that's not leadership. So we said, so I made the judgment, we are going on offense. I am going to be leaning into issues. I am not going to wait for issues to come to me. I'm not going to let the left define the terms of the debate. I'm not going to let the media determine the narrative. We are going to create it through our actions. And too many Republicans are worried that if you stand strong, that the left will attack you or the media will attack you. Of course they're going to attack you. If they're not attacking me, then I must not be doing my job right. Don't worry about what they say. And the final thing I said is, and Mike had mentioned, you know, I served as a U.S. congressman for a short time. I have recovered from that experience, mind you, don't worry. And it's an important job. There's a lot of important jobs, but being executive is a little bit different. because yes, you got to be right on policy, you got to do all those things, but you got to be a leader. It really calls for exercising leadership. And to me, leadership is having the courage to make difficult decisions in the teeth of opposition and criticism. A leader must have the confidence to stand all alone if need be. And so for us, as I got into office, COVID presented that situation for us because we were in a situation, the third largest state in the country, one of the highest percentage of elderly, economy based on tourism, which we needed travel to continue. So this situation was an existential threat to our state. But I made the judgment, leaders take the bull by the horns and make the decisions for themselves. They don't subcontract out their leadership to health bureaucrats like Dr. Fauci. We made sure to do what we thought was right, and when we were doing that, a lot of those decisions were very, very lonely. No governor in this country was attacked more relentlessly during then, actually during now too, but certainly during then, than me. And I'll tell you, I had a lot of my supporters and friends that were saying, man, they are just killing you. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you need to maybe trim your sails a little bit here because politically you may not be able to recover if they keep filleting you like this. And my view is a leader is going to put the interests of the people he represents above his own political interests. You got to be more concerned with saving the jobs of the people you represent than in protecting your own job. So I was totally willing to let the chips fall where they may, knowing that we did the right thing. And in hindsight, now people look back, and most of the people that opposed what we were doing, to have businesses open, kids in school, the whole 9 yards, they act like they supported what we did all along, but they didn't. But we stood strong, and Florida is better as a result of our leadership during that time. So fast forward 4 years. We came in with 32,000 vote margin. Stand for election in November of 22. We don't win by half a percentage point or 32,000 votes. We win re-election by over 1.5 million votes, the highest percentage of the vote that any Republican has ever achieved in a governor's race in Florida. We were able to do well across the board and across demographics. We won over 60% of the Hispanic vote. We won independent voters by 18 percentage points. We were able to win women voters by 8 percentage points, and we took previously blue urban counties like Miami-Dade and flipped those counties red for the first time in a long time. But it's not just about me. I was leading the ticket, but I had a responsibility to make sure everybody running on our Republican ticket had support and was able to get into office in the races that we were competitive in. And so we helped both houses of our state legislature, and we helped people running for school board throughout the state of Florida. We now have super majorities in the Florida legislature in both houses, and of the 34 school board races we helped, 29 conservative school board members won their race, and they are now serving and making a difference in our schools. November's election and the results made it so that starting in January, for the first time since the era of the Civil War, there is not one single solitary Democrat elected to statewide office in the Sunshine State. And I can quote an article that was in one of the corporate media outlets titled this, quote, "There's no plan, there's nothing. Florida Democrats in despair about the future." That is what you call Republicans winning when that happens. So at the end of the day, we were able to do that because Florida voters responded to our efforts. They saw that Florida was leading the way on so many different issues, and the results have been incredible. Florida is #1 in the nation for net in-migration since I've been governor. We are currently the fastest growing state in the United States. We rank #1 for new business formations. We rank #1 in tourism, #1 in economic freedom, although Utah probably gives us a run for the money on that. #1 in education freedom, #1 in parental involvement in education. And I think that's because we lead not merely with words, but with deeds. You know, politics is not entertainment. It's not about building a brand. It's not about virtue signaling on social media. It is about delivering results. And our record in Florida of producing results has been second to none. Just since the election in November, we have already done the following. We enacted a 50% reduction in tolls for Florida commuters throughout our state, largest toll relief in history. We've enacted universal education savings accounts so we will remain #1 in school choice across the country. We have stood for life by enacting the heartbeat bill in the state of Florida. We have stood for the Second Amendment by enacting constitutional carry. We have formally stripped Disney of its self-governing status. And we fortified our newly instituted statewide Office of Election Crimes and Election Fraud so that we can hold people who violate our election laws accountable for their fraud. And over the next 3 or 4 weeks, because our legislature is still in session, they will enact legislation that I will sign to do the following. We are going to kneecap ESG in the state of Florida. And we're leading a group of 18 states that are pushing back, so we're not the only ones. We are also going to be the first state in the country to eliminate DEI at all our public universities. Gone. We're going to prohibit land purchases by entities controlled or related to the CCP. We are going to prohibit the implementation in Florida of any central bank digital currency. We're going to enact the largest tax relief in the history of the state of Florida, which is going to include permanent sales tax exclusion on all baby items. So newborns come, parents don't have to pay tax on cribs, strollers, clothes, wipes, diapers, none of it. Raise your kids tax-free. We are going to enact protections for Floridians against Biden's border crisis and illegal immigration that are some of the strongest measures in the country. And while we've already done this through our medical board, and it's sad that we have to do this, and I know Utah has had to do, we are going to prohibit for minors gender surgeries and puberty blockers. We're going to take the protections that we enacted for so many people during COVID, such as you should not lose your job based on your choice about whether to take an mRNA shot. School children cannot be mandated to take the COVID jab. And you should never have these things imposed on you. So we are making all those protections permanent, and we are expanding them. And so we will have the strongest protections for medical freedom anywhere in the country, and we're proud of that. We are going to enact the largest increase in teacher salaries in the history of Florida, but we're going to do it in a way where the money only goes to the teachers, not to the unions. And we're going to make sure Florida remains tough on crime. We are going to take these people who are dealing fentanyl to our youth, and we are going to treat them like the murderers that they are. Not bad for 4 or 5 months worth of work, right? I'm just saying, it's good stuff. But what I think Florida shows is that leadership matters and that being bold gets rewarded. When it comes to vision, when it comes to principles, when it comes to policies, the people of Utah, of Florida, and I believe of the United States, they side with us against the radical left. I mean, think about how Utah governs itself. Think about how Florida governs itself in terms of fiscal and economic policy. Now, Florida, we have no state income tax. You guys should try that sometime. I'm just saying, it's not bad. So our state of Florida now has millions of more people than the state of New York does, and yet New York's budget is twice the size of the budget of the state of Florida. But yet Florida has better roads, better services, higher performing K through 12 schools. Where is all that money going that they're taxing people so much in New York? Of course people are going to leave when they do that. We also in Florida have the second lowest debt per capita in the country. Our debt, with an economy of over $1 trillion in Florida, is $20 billion. Compare that to the federal government. The federal debt is bigger than the entire American economy, and it's getting bigger every day. We have exercised our line item veto to make sure people aren't wasting our taxpayers' dollars. Last year, I vetoed $3.3 billion out of the state budget. That's 3% of the budget. Can you imagine if they did that in Washington, D.C. and started trimming the bloat? And people understand it's because of the recklessness in Washington with the spending, with the debt, with the printing of money by the Federal Reserve, unprecedented amounts, that we've had the worst sustained inflation in our country's history. And yet, are they doing anything to address it? Of course they're not. Are they expanding domestic energy to try to put some downward pressure on inflation? No, they should. Are they trying to moderate and reduce federal spending, which would put a downward pressure on inflation? Of course not. They should. So people understand if you want a well-managed budget, if you want a sound economy, you got to embrace conservative policies. Utah has shown that, and Florida has shown that. We've also shown that law and order works. Allowing rioting and disorder destroys communities. You see all these cities spiraling out of control over the last few years, and yet you look at Florida, our crime rate is at a 50-year low. We reject the idea of defunding law enforcement. In fact, we passed legislation in Florida saying local governments cannot defund their police. We'll put the money back in, and we're proud to stand with the men and women who wear the uniform and work to keep our communities safe. When the BLM riots broke out in 2020 in other cities across the country, I immediately mobilized the National Guard in Florida. We dispatched state law enforcement agencies, and we made it very clear, you're not burning down cities in the state of Florida, and it didn't happen. We've even done legislation to ensure that if someone does riot, if they do loot, if they do engage in mob violence, it's not going to be like they do in Portland where they take their mugshot and just slap them on the wrist. No, in Florida, you're not getting a slap on the wrist, you're getting the inside of a jail cell because we're holding you accountable. Now, that anti-rioting legislation was actually criticized by the United Nations, and so we must be on the right track if the UN is hitting us. We also reject the emergence of progressive prosecutors, usually funded by people like George Soros, who get into office and they manipulate the law to pursue ideology. They refuse to enforce laws they don't like, and they weaponize their office to advance a partisan political agenda. When we had one of those prosecutors in Tampa, in Florida, who said he was not going to abide by the laws of our state, I removed him from his post. One of the reasons we did so well in Florida is because people, particularly parents of all political stripes, they want to see the school system be used to educate kids, not to indoctrinate kids. We've enacted legislation to protect the rights of parents, to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. Parents need to have a role in the schools. They need to have access to the curriculum that's being used in the schools. And we've had a number of parents use our transparency legislation to object to books that have pornography in it in schools. And they object, and it gets taken out. And the left and the media, they try to say that's, quote, banning books. And so we did an event, and I titled it Exposing the Book Ban Hoax. And before we did the press conference, I played a video that basically had pictures of all the books that the parents had objected to. The local news who was covering that cut their feed because they said it was too graphic. If it's too graphic for the 6 o'clock news, how is it okay for a 9-year-old student? These kids deserve a sound education, and we in Florida fight anybody who's seeking to rob them of their innocence. We have also led the way by eliminating critical race theory in our K-12 schools. We're not teaching kids to hate our country or to hate each other with our tax dollars. No, we're going to teach kids about American civics, about our Constitution. We're going to teach them about what it means to be an American. And we are the only state in the country that has set aside one day every year for students to learn about the victims of communist regimes throughout history. We're telling the truth about Marxism and Leninism. And of course, I see these education issues through the lens of a governor, but I also see them through the lens of a dad. of a 6, a 5, and a 3-year-old. And my wife and I think most parents here and around the country, just believe that kids should be able to go to school, they should be able to watch cartoons, they should just be able to be kids without having somebody's agenda shoved down their throat. It is wrong for a teacher to tell a young student that they were born in the wrong body or that their gender is a choice. And we made sure that we clarified that in Florida law. The left didn't like that much. A lot of the media didn't like that much. Disney didn't like that much. But you know, they don't run the state of Florida. We run the state of Florida, and we are going to do what's right for the children of Florida. And when it came to having to deal with this one company that had basically run the state for 50 years, that actually operated its own government, can you imagine that? With no accountability, was exempt from laws that everybody else had to follow. That arrangement did not work for us in Florida. We are not going to allow massive corporate welfare, period, but especially for a company that is going down the road of having gender ideology in elementary school. So we said that was wrong, and we removed the self-governing status after almost 60 years. We stood up for what was right. And I mentioned we have the bill coming down the pike for higher education. This idea of DEI, they say it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. In reality, it's a Trojan horse to try to impose a left-wing ideological agenda on our universities and on the students. How it's really practiced, DEI, it's really discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, and that has no part in our public system. The people believe with us that the rule of law matters and that our borders and our national sovereignty matters. They don't want open borders. They don't want to see fentanyl pouring across the country in such numbers that we had over 105,000 overdose deaths last year alone, the majority caused by fentanyl. They don't want criminal aliens coming across the border, and they certainly don't want people, as has happened, coming across the border who are on our own government's terrorist watch list. And in Florida, we have sent people to help Texas, to help fortify the border. We have banned sanctuary cities in the state of Florida. And if you go down there, you realize, because we've got a lot of good people working there, there's never going to be enough manpower alone. You need to construct a wall along the southern border. It needs to get done. And here's what I can tell you. We had a hurricane come through Florida, very powerful, almost Category 5 in September, Hurricane Ian, and it really battered southwest Florida, including taking out a bridge from the mainland to Pine Island, and then severing the causeway from the mainland to Sanibel Island in 3 different places. Now, those were not state bridges. There's not things we controlled. The local community was being told it's going to take 6 months to be able to restore connectivity to the islands, and that would have caused the islands to die. So they came to me and they said, "Governor, can you help?" I'm like, "I'll help." I'm like, all right. So I got my guys together. I said, listen, no red tape, no bureaucracy, no excuses. Just get it done. And so Pine Island, they didn't have to wait 6 months. We took the job over, reopened the bridge in 3 days. And we did Sanibel 2 weeks later. And I raised that just because I am willing to send my Florida guys to the southern border to build the wall. So Joe, send us in, put us in, we'll get it done. The people side with us on believing that we need an economy and businesses that are focused on their core missions, not corporations pursuing a woke agenda with shareholder assets. We reject ESG. We reject woke banking. We're not going to let these massive companies do an end run around our constitutional system by trying to do through the business sphere what they could never get through the medium of elections. People will not vote for you if you're attacking domestic energy. They will not vote for you if you're attacking Second Amendment rights or religious freedom. So don't let them go around the constitutional system. Don't let them change our culture or change our policies through the whims of people who may be very wealthy but have never been elected to anything. And so we believe that ESG and the like is fundamentally wrong, and we need to stop the woke from taking over our economy. We also need the restoration of true constitutional government. And I think when people look to see how the federal bureaucracy operates, it is an unaccountable, weaponized Leviathan. You know, when Ronald Reagan came on the scene, he used to joke that the most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And while what he was saying was true, a lot of the excess we saw in those days was rooted in central planning run amok. These were people that said you could end poverty by waging a war on poverty. They ended up doing policies that made it worse, and they ended up holding our country back. And that was true then. It's still true now. But I think now you have government power being used much sharper. I think it's weaponized, and it tends to be mobilized and weaponized against people that the ruling class doesn't like. So, for example, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the IRS mobilized its power to target conservative nonprofit groups across the country. Just last year, 2 years ago, CMS issued a rule that said nurses and doctors who did not take the COVID jab would lose their jobs. Congress never voted on that. There was never a debate about that. They were unilaterally making a decision as an unaccountable bureaucracy that you should not be able to put food on your table if you don't bend the knee and do what they told you. And of course, we've seen the FBI send people to surveil school board meetings in Northern Virginia. So this government is unaccountable to you. It's unaccountable to people throughout our country, and it needs to be put in its proper place. So I know that people side with us on these issues because the last many years have been a test of where the people stand on all these issues. You have seen people flood jurisdictions or flee jurisdictions controlled by leftist politicians imposing leftist ideology, and they go to places like Utah, like Texas, like Florida to seek greener pastures. In fact, this great American exodus, Florida has served as the promised land of sanity, a place where freedom would reign supreme and where they could live productive lives. I have to watch election results in other parts of the country because, like Chicago, they just elected someone even more left. I can tell you I'm going to see more people moving to Naples as a result of that election. That's just the way it works. The reason why people are fleeing is because these states and cities have embraced faddish ideology at the expense of enduring principles. They've harmed public safety by coddling criminals and attacking the men and women of law enforcement. They've imposed unreasonable burdens on taxpayers, all to finance unfathomable levels of public spending. They have harmed education by locking kids out of school and by subordinating the interests of students and parents to partisan interest groups and to ideological indoctrination. And of course, especially during COVID, they imposed medical authoritarianism, restrictions and mandates that were not about your health. It was about their ability to control your behavior, and it was wrong. The common thread to all this, what's motivating this philosophically, is what I call the woke mind virus. It's a form of cultural Marxism that tries to divide us based on identity politics. It represents an attack on merit and achievement, and it constitutes a war on the truth. Don't tell me that babies are born racist. Don't tell me that men can get pregnant. That is not true, and I will not accept that as being true. We reject the woke ideology. We will not allow truth, reality, and facts to become optional. We understand this is a threat, though, not just in the halls of the legislature, but throughout our society. So yes, we will fight the woke in the legislature. We will fight the woke in the schools. We will fight the woke in the corporations. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We've made the state of Florida the place where woke goes to die. And we have no choice, because the left in this country is playing for keeps. And as I look ahead to 2024, I believe the Democrats are able to sweep the offices again, win the presidency in both houses of Congress. They will seek to pack the U.S. Supreme Court, abolish the Electoral College, make Washington, D.C. a state, and eliminate voter ID in every jurisdiction in this country. Now, say what you want about that agenda. I think we all think that's a bad agenda. But objectively, that is not an agenda that American families are sitting around their dinner table talking about. Oh, if we can just ban voter ID, we'd be so much better off as a family. No, they're talking about schools. They're talking about crime. They're talking about the economy, inflation, groceries. That's what they're concerned about. No, that's an agenda where the left is trying to make the conservative part of the country second-class citizens. They don't want us to have an adequate voice in the affairs of our country. So in times like these, there is no substitute for victory. Republicans need to shake the culture of losing that has developed in recent years. The time for excuses is over. We must get it done. I'm confident that if the election in 24 is a referendum on Joe Biden's failures, and if we as Republicans provide a fresh vision for American revival, then Republicans will win all across the country. But we can't get distracted, and we can't afford to lose, because freedom is on the ballot, and nobody appreciated the fragility of freedom more than our nation's founding fathers. When they went to Philadelphia in 1787 to craft the Constitution, they did so after having studied the history of every republic and the history of mankind, because they wanted to draw lessons about what had been done and see if they could take from those lessons things that would be applicable to the American experiment. And they really only found one thing that all those republics had in common throughout history, and it was this: every one of them had failed. And so they understood it fell to the United States of America to determine, could people really govern themselves? Could you have a society rooted in the idea that our rights are God-given, not given as a courtesy of the government? That the government should operate on the basis of the rule of law, not the rule of individual men? Or was mankind forever destined to live under various forms of despotism? And they fully expected the United States would answer that question, but they also knew that it wouldn't be something that would be as simple as just doing the Constitution. They knew that every generation would have to fight for it. When Benjamin Franklin walked out of that convention, he was stopped on the street and asked, "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a republic or a monarchy?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." You can have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. You can have the best Constitution in the world. But ultimately, this requires us to stand up as free people and defend our liberties. Now, Florida is proof positive that we, the people, are not destined for failure. I believe the decline of our country is a choice. I believe success for our nation is attainable, and I definitely believe that freedom is worth fighting for. It is not easy to fight for freedom in this day of age because the threats to freedom are more complex and widespread than in past. The threats can come from an entrenched bureaucrat in D.C., a jet setter in Davos, or even a corporation wielding public power. But fight we must. We must embrace our founding creed that our rights are not granted by the courtesy of the state, but are a gift from Almighty God. We must reject the idea that self-government can be subcontracted out to technocratic elites and bureaucrats who reduce human beings to mere data points. We must insist on the restoration of time-tested constitutional principles so that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Florida has led, Utah has led in preserving what the founder of our country called the sacred fire of liberty. This is a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish a nation conceived in liberty. It's a fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg when our nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned among the boys who stormed the beaches of Normandy to liberate a continent and to free the world. It's a fire that infused the young preacher's dream, relayed at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that the Declaration of Independence says what it meant and meant what it said, that all men are created equal. It's the fire that burned when a resolute president stood at the foot of the Berlin Wall and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," staring down the communists and ending the Cold War. So it's our responsibility to carry this torch. It's not a responsibility we should run from. It's a responsibility we should welcome. It will not be easy. Leadership is not cost-free. The left will come loaded for bear. But I also think the sacrifices we are supposed to make and are called upon to make pale in comparison to so many sacrifices that people have made throughout American history. When I would fly to Washington, D.C. as a U.S. congressman, we would sometimes take a route going into Reagan Airport that was flush parallel to the National Mall. So if you looked out the left side of the plane, you saw beautiful vistas of the Lincoln Memorial, the reflecting pool, the Washington Monument, up on the hill perched the U.S. Capitol building, and you'd think, man, this is really inspiring. This is kind of the ideals that made our country great, to see those monuments like that, and the tourists loved it. As I started to do that several times, I started looking out the other side of the plane, and it occurred to me that those were really where the best monuments for our country were. Now, when you're looking out the right side of the plane, you're looking over the Potomac River. You're seeing monuments that are very nondescript, very discreet, arranged, very orderly over rolling hills in a place called Arlington National Cemetery. And it occurred to me that those are the most important monuments, because it doesn't matter what the ideals of a Lincoln or a Jefferson or a Washington were. It doesn't matter how great of a leaders they were. None of that stuff ultimately can stand the test of time unless you have people that are willing, when called, to put on that uniform, stand on that wall, risk their lives, and indeed, in many cases, give that last full measure of devotion. So let's honor their sacrifice through our hard work. We are not called upon to give sacrifices that level. We are merely called upon to be on our guard. We're called to stand firm. We're called to be courageous. And we are called to be strong. We're proud of what we've accomplished in the state of Florida. But I can tell you this, I've only begun to fight. Thank you all. Great to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless Utah. So great to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. God bless. Thanks.
I was going to say here for Governor DeSantis, but I don't think you need any encouragement. Thank you, Governor DeSantis, for your time. I know you're on a busy schedule lately, so thank you very much. Thank you all for being great. This is going to be an excellent day. Back to the order of business. Right now, we are going to hear from some of our